One other thing I want to touch on briefly is tools for doing spoke adjustment. My go-to tool is this unit from DRC. Can pick it up from most bike shops, online stores, Bike Master, places like that. What I like about it is it has the replaceable ends. You can swap these out. Comes with these 8 different sizes. Should fit pretty much any application you might need. It's the size of the tips give you a nice clean even bite on each spoke nipple. Prevents rounding off of those while you're doing the adjustment. And you know, some of these you have to snug up a little bit, so it's good to have a nice rugged tool that does the job. One of the worst tools for doing something like this is something on this idea, which is like a multi-use tool. I found this one to not be very accurate as far as the size wise goes. There's a lot of slop on some of these if you're trying to make an adjustment. It's a cheap tool. I don't use it. I probably should toss it, but not something I would recommend. Sometimes you may have a toolkit with your bike that has a spoke tool. This one is from an older Kawasaki motorcycle. Notice it's got a 10 millimeter and a 9 millimeter. I don't know that, doesn't look like it's actually accurate, but whatever. Just another option. And another option would be if you had a set of small metric wrenches, kind of like this Craftsman unit would do in a pinch. Again, I'd be careful about having the right size bite on the spoke nipple. You want to be able to have a good secure fit when you're turning these things, and so you can tighten as necessary with the correct amount of force without actually rounding the spoke nipples off. Okay, so now that we have the rim all assembled, all the spokes are put in just finger tight. They're all in the correct positions. Now the next step is to actually tighten the spokes and get them properly lined up. To do this, I'm using this old Hosan truing stand that I rescued from a pile of junk, but it's functional, it works. Same thing with the dial indicator gauges that you see here. These were being thrown out from a QA department in a company that I was working for. They were just cleaning house in the QA lab, and they were throwing these things out. I looked at them, they were still functional. The Federal's missing the lens, but it doesn't really matter because it still actually functions very well. The Westos in actually really good condition. They just weren't using them. They decided they were going to throw them away, so I put them to good use, and I just scavenged some metal brackets to make holders for them. I have no idea where the original brackets were for this, but this is what I use to go ahead and do the alignment of the rim. And as you can see, just from scratch, you watch that motion and you watch where the dial indicator gauges float to. You can see how far out this is, which really it is, but it's surprisingly not bad just by doing it, by just going around and tightening all these spoke nipples just by hand. So it gets you somewhere close to the ballpark. You get a starting point. Typically what I do is I do the left to right first, would be this Federal gauge here, because what will happen is you'll notice that the tip of the dial indicator gauge for the run out, in other words the distance from the rim to the center of the spoke, center of the wheel, you'll notice that the tip of this doesn't stay lined up with the edge of the rim, so it's going to be very tough to get a good measurement of the run out without having this lined up left to right first. So generally what you do is you run around and you identify both the high and the low spots, and I'll usually work with a piece of tape or pieces of tape and mark spots where I know it's either high or low. And just what you're going to do is you're going to slowly start to adjust all these spoke nipples and bring the rim so that it's tracking straight. And you'll be within about 10 or 20 thousandths on this dial gauge, or maybe even 30 thousandths, which still isn't bad. You'll see when we get this dialed in, to get that to be straight, true. And then, like I say, once this piece is done, we move on to the run out. And while you're adjusting the run out, you still want to pay attention to the left and right, because depending on how you balance the spoke adjustment, you can conceivably throw out the left to right at the same time. So as we do this, I'll show you, you need to do this in a balanced manner. So again, if you're tightening spokes, you want to do it evenly left to right for the run out, so that you don't mess up the left to right. But we'll get to that when I get to that section of the video. One of the other things I wanted to bring up too is, as I said, this is a wheel stand that I rescued out of a bunch of junk. You don't really even need anything this elaborate. Certainly you can buy truing stands anywhere from a budget model up to a high-tech model. Spend whatever you want to spend. But you can even do this with just some blocks of wood, some 2x, cut it out, get to the same general shape, and cut some V grooves at the tops of either side of your wood stand. And you can use the axle as the spin point. And then instead of dial indicator gauges, you can just use stiff wire. You're going to want to do the same thing. You're going to want to have the stiff wire, two pieces, one touching this edge of the rim so you can get the left to right, and then another one coming up this way so you can test the run out. And then with the wire, you can just see, well, where does it touch and where does it not, and then get that so it's just touching all the way around for both the left to right and the run out. You know, again, shade tree stuff, it still works, it still does the job, and it'll get you where you need to be. Okay, so now we're going to start the actual adjustment process, or the spoke tightening process. We're going to start with the left to right, as I said earlier, and I'm using a dial indicator gauge, and like I said before, you can use a hard piece of wire, but what we're looking for here is we're looking for the high spot, in other words, where it's closest to this gauge point, and then the low spot, which will be further away. So high, you're going to see the gauge increase in value. Low, you're going to see it decrease. So we'll go around one time and look to see where that actually is. A good reference point would be to use the valve stem hole right there, so you know you've gone a complete revolution. Give you an idea. But as you can see here, this is going down in value, so that's going towards a low point, and it continues to go down, and now it's going back up. So right about there, we're going to call that a low point. So we'll grab a piece of tape, and it's got a little L on it, and I'm going to just stick that right there so I know that's roughly the low area. And then we're going to continue around, so it continues to go up, 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 and goes there, and it starts to go back and down again. So let's grab another piece of tape. This one has a handy little H on it, and we'll put that there. So we suspect that's the high part, but it may have more than one high spot, so you want to make sure you do at least a couple full revolutions to make sure these still register the same all the way around. So we're going back down, 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 down. There's our low spot from our previous piece of tape. Then we go back up. Then we're going to keep going back up until we hit Mr. High Spot right there. So now we know roughly where high and low actually sit relative to each other. They're not quite 180 degrees apart, but it's almost there. So we'll begin. What you want to do is try and shoot for the middle value. If you want to get real technical, what you can do is you can measure the center of the hub from there to, like, say, this edge, and then come out and measure off of this flat edge here the center of the rim, and that'll tell you precisely to the millimeter where that rim should sit. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take and shoot for the middle value between high and low. So as we go to tighten these, first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our DRC spoke wrench that I had spoken about before, no pun intended. This particular spoke nipple that we're dealing with right here, that's a size 4.4, as you can see on that replaceable tip. That gives you a good solid bite on the spoke nipple without any slop, and that's what you want. And we'll start doing the adjustments. So now that we have our high and low spots identified, what we're going to do is we're going to start tightening the spokes that are on this side of the rim. So not these going over here, but these on this back side. So you'll see every other spoke is going to the outside of the rim, to the left side of the rim from where I'm looking at it. You always want to be tightening spokes. You shouldn't be loosening them at this point. So we've got our mark here. We're at our high point with a piece of tape, and we're just going to slowly start tightening these with the wrench, 4.4. Give them each like a little bit of a turn. And we'll just slowly work your way around. And again, we're skipping the ones that are going on that direction. We're just tightening the ones on the back side to bring down this high spot. And then we'll give this a turn, and you'll feel these start to get loosened as you tighten some of the others. They're no longer finger tight, they're looser than that as you start to bring that rim in. So what you want to do is just kind of go around again, keep tabs on this. So there's our high spot again, and now it's still the high spot, but not quite as much as it was before. So we'll continue to work that side of the rim. Again, tightening the ones just on that side of the rim. Give them each turn. Take your time. Takes a little bit of patience. You work your way slowly. You don't want to do anything really drastic. You don't want to just go and crank way down on them. And you'll feel them starting to snug up a little bit as you add turns. And again, you only want to be tightening. You shouldn't be loosening any spokes at this point. So we'll make another spin around and look to see where our high spot is. So going down, that's the low spot still. Going back up, that's still the high spot right there. So we still have some more to go. Again, tightening just the spokes on that side of the hub. Give them each another turn. Just slowly start bringing that back into alignment. And just want to stay right in that same general high spot area. So I continued to tighten those as I was just showing you, and now we've gotten this a lot closer. If you watch the gauge, we're at the high point now, but we're going to be between 90 and 10. So we're getting very close. It's not going around 2 or 3 revolutions anymore. It's just within this measurement here. So it's getting very close to being where we want to be for left to right. So now what we can do is we can go back to our mark, the low mark, which is our piece of tape right here. And what we can do to bring that value up to where we want it to be, now we can start tightening using the spokes that are on this side of the rim. So tighten this one, tighten this one. And we're going to do the same basic thing. We're going to just go like a turn or so at a time and just slowly bring those in. So again, we're looking for our low mark. I'm on this side of the rim. We tighten those up. You want to make sure you stay on this side of the rim, these left side spokes. And like I said earlier, you always want to be tightening. You shouldn't be loosening any spokes. So work around, I don't know, so maybe like about 45, 60 degrees on this side of the rim tightening. And we'll tighten a bunch of these within this general area. You can feel these are still pretty loose now that we've started to snug things up. And now let's go on this side of that tape. Again, it's the outside spokes, the right side spokes I should say. And again, starting to snug those up. So I've continued to adjust this side for the high spots, and then these side spokes when I got to the low spots. And as you can see, we're getting a lot closer now. So we're between like 40 and 70. So we're just going to keep on continuing to do that. I've had to move the tape a few times to where the high, because as you bring these in, the high spot's actually going to may change a little bit. It may move a few degrees up or down on the rim. Same thing with the low. The center of that high or low area may move as you start to bring these in closer and closer. So we're just going to keep on doing that. We're going to keep on focusing on where the high is, adjusting these backside spokes to bring that over, to take it off of the high. And then the same thing with the lows. We have the low side tape here. We're just going to continue to adjust on this side to bring that in closer to minimize the variation left to right. Remember, you're still always tightening spokes. You shouldn't be loosening spokes at all at this point. Okay, so after about an hour of tweaking with the adjustments for the left to right, we now have this result here. So you can see as you go around, it's just about within 10. And at this point, all the spokes should be fairly tight. You should have noticed that as you began to get these in line. They should all have about the same tightness. You can use apparently they make a spoke torque wrench, fairly expensive. Don't really need it. As long as you can go through and actually ting on the spokes, you can hear you know, they'll have like a high ring to them. If there's anything that sounds dull, you may have a loose spoke. But really what you're going by is this gauge here. Or the other thing too is if you look at the point of the runout gauge, it does the same thing as a piece of hard wire would do, as I suggested for the low budget setup. You'll notice that that sits right at that same point all the way around the rim. It doesn't really move off of that indicated spot. The other thing you look at here too is if you look at the values for the runout, that's also come in very, very close now. So there's a couple spots we'll do a bit of an adjustment for, and I'll discuss how that works. But right now, the in and out, I mean the left to right looks really good. We're not going to play with that anymore. We will double check it after we make a final fine adjustment for the run out. But right now we're looking like we're in pretty good shape. Alright, so one thing we have to talk about before we get into the final adjustment with the run out, in other words the distance from the edge of the rim to the center of the hub. The one thing we have to talk about is this guy right here. Every rim that gets produced has a seam somewhere on it. It's a straight piece of metal that gets bent and shaped into a rim, then gets welded and polished, but you're going to have a place on your rim somewhere with a seam. Now the effect of this is going to be a strange reading on the dial indicator gauge. So if we take and we look at what's going on with this as we spin around to where this high point is, where our seam is, you're going to watch the gauge react to that, so it jumps a bit. So you're going to want to, I won't say ignore that reading, but just be aware that the change is most likely due to some residual material from that weld where that's placed. So don't get real excited, just be aware of where that is on your rim and when you see it on here. Now obviously if you're doing it with just a wire, you may read that as a high point, but you can pretty much ignore it, because you look on the inside of the rim, you'll find this area, and that's going to be a high point whether you're doing it with a dial indicator gauge or if you're doing it with a piece of hard wire, the low budget method. So just be aware of that. Where you have the higher value, what this is going to require, as I said, you're going to be tightening both left and right spokes, but just a little bit here. So we're going to go like a quarter of a turn on this one, quarter of a turn on this one, quarter of a turn here, and so on. Now keep in mind we're adjusting both the left side spokes and the right side spokes to minimize changing the left to right. All we're looking to do is change this distance between the outside edge of the rim and the center. So now that we've made that slight adjustment, let's go around again and see how much closer we are. See, most of the adjustments at 80, and then you got just the one spot that's a little high here. But again, there's our weld right there, so we have to keep that in mind. But we can still go here and go like about a quarter of a turn on some of these just to bring that in. Okay, now let's make another turn. So we just have this one spot. Again, we're near the weld, but I'm thinking we're going to adjust on either side of that weld just a little bit more So again, very slight adjustments. Quarter turn, both the left and the right side spokes. Quarter turn, quarter turn. All right, let's take another run around. Okay, so we still have this here. Still a little high here, so we're going to do the same thing in this area. Now we're just in front of the weld in the rim. So at this point, I'm pretty much done doing the adjustments for the run out, and I'm pretty satisfied with how both the run out gauge and the left to right gauge are looking right now. I don't know that I can get this much closer. Still seeing that irregular bounce from where the seam is. But I also noticed too, if you watch that point real closely, seemed to be some irregularity in the rim that seems to bounce up and down quite a bit right there. And I don't think that's a spoke adjustment. And just to prove that out, I'm going to make a small adjustment here. And we're going to work the rim over to the right. And I'm going to measure off this inside edge of the rim instead of this lip here and see how close that is. So all I'm doing is I'm just adjusting the the wheel stand to bring that over a bit, and we're gonna set the point of this gauge here up against that. And now let's take a look and see how that reads. Yeah, it's pretty close. I don't think I'm going to be able to get it much closer than that. But at least with that, you get the general idea of what's involved. The process that I use, certainly I would research this yourself and see if there's any other methods that get you to the same place, but that's my video.